The Forked Ways. Chapter 9. Walking Blind. The white navy beans on Fletch's lunch tray looked like tiny, glistening skulls, and he didn't feel inclined to eat any more of them. He and Silver sat at a corner table to avoid being overheard. "Betsy and Bill Weathers made a trip to Oak Hollow to see my grandparents," Silver told him. "I think because Gram or her family had once lived in Assembly. Anyway, she and Betsy had known one another when they were growing up. Pop was a doctor, but he and Gram were also medicine people in the Cherokee tradition. Betsy invited them down for a visit, and Bill took them to the swamp, and he told them all he knew about the Wog. Gram and Pop thought the Wog might be a night walker, because they sometimes take on the shape of a black dog when they go hunting." "A night walker?" Fletch repeated. The name made him shudder. "Is that what's after me?" "Maybe. It's supposed to be a kind of witch, a shape changer, and it feeds on people's souls until they die of weakness or take their own lives. Then the night walker can lengthen its life by however many years the victim would have had left. But there are ways to protect yourself, once you know for sure that's what's going on." "With tobacco, right?" "With remade tobacco," Silver corrected. "Ordinary tobacco's strong, sometimes dangerous, but remade tobacco has magic in it, like the Cherokee version of holy water. Whenever Pop visited here, he and Bill used it in working against the Wog. They tried spells against night walkers, but they never even got a good look at it. I guess part of the problem was that they were never sure about the 4 holy places." He shrugged. "It became sort of a hobby with them. They spent years surveying possible sites, mapping them, trying to discover how each site was used and for how long and by what culture. I've got boxes full of the stuff at home. Gram died when I was 7, and Pop died when I was 12. Bill died just last year. Betsy and I haven't really done anything on our own." Fletch looked up. "Bill's letter mentioned something about iron being used against the Wog by a friend of God. Did you know that the folk who founded Assembly called themselves that?" Silver drained the last of the milk from his carton and folded it flat. "Yes. Betsy told me about them. They were part of some kind of religious cult, weren't they? Renegade Baptists or something?" "I'm not really sure. Dad says some of them believed hell would finally burn out and that even the devils would repent and go back to heaven. I think maybe they used to fight witches hundreds of years ago in Europe." Fletch shook his head. "All the folks I've met at Assembly seem pretty ordinary, though." "You're not ordinary," Silver told him. "Have you had any more wolf dreams?" "No, but I had one last night that was even worse because it was so real. I was sleeping on the floor of the library, and I floated up right through the ceiling into the attic." Silver raised an eyebrow. "That doesn't sound too bad." "That's just the first part. I came down the stairs and saw myself asleep right there on the floor. I walked over and actually looked down at myself. We were even wearing the same clothes. I tried to get the other me to wake up, and when he opened his eyes, it was like I was looking up at myself. It was just a flash. I'm not really sure that part even happened, because when I sat up, I was alone." Silver took a sip of milk and eyed him thoughtfully. "Did you talk to your dad about it?" "No. He's already worried about me. I'm afraid he'd seriously freak." "I would seriously freak if I saw myself like that. I wish it had lasted longer, though. You might have been able to talk to yourself, find out what the other you thought about it." Fletch looked at him in exasperation. "I'll be sure to try that out next time I run into myself." All afternoon, Fletch kept thinking about Bill Weathers' letter, and he was still pondering it as he rode the school bus home. It was only about 5 miles to Assembly, but for some reason the town was near the end of the route. Susanna Nelms and the Avery children all got off at the co-op, and Fletch usually walked Susanna home before cutting back through the common garden. Along the route, they passed fields and forest. the bus winding through mazes of dirt roads and easing across rickety wooden bridges. There were 4 holy places to be found, and Fletch reasoned that they had to be fairly close by. Though Silver hadn't mentioned it, he figured the labyrinth was probably one of the sites. And the others? The obvious answer hit him as he got off the bus. 4 holy places, 4 stones in the weed garden, each with a different, perplexing symbol. 1 for each site. The Avery children immediately scattered, but Susanna hung back. She and Fletch crossed the street and went into the barber shop to get soft drinks, a knee-high orange for Fletch, a chocolate yoo-hoo for Susanna. Through the open door they could hear a scratchy tune coming from 4x's old Victrola. Wait till the sun shines, Nellie, when the clouds go drifting by. We will be happy, Nellie, don't you sigh. 4x was at the barber's chair, giving Captain Harbour a trim. He waved his clippers at them. I've got a flat top waiting for you, Fletch Forrester. You just say the word and I'll get rid of that mop you're wearing. He looked at Susanna. And Miss Susanna, don't you forget to tell your daddy I got that snake oil he ordered. Susanna giggled. She was old enough to know that 4x was only joking, but still thought he might actually have snake oil among the bright bottles of hair tonic on the shelves. Out on the sidewalk, she picked up a stone and carried it 7 steps, then set it down again. The little girl did this every day, and always asked how long Fletch thought it would take for the stone to finally reach the bridge. "What are you going to do with it once we get there?" Fletch asked her. "Throw it in the creek, or else feed it to the troll. She eats rocks when she can't get billy goats." "The troll's a girl?" Fletch asked her. "Yep. She gave me this bracelet, see?" Susanna held up her wrist, and Fletch dutifully admired the frayed ribbon and misshapen beads. "Why do you always take 7 steps?" "'Cause it's how old I am. She likes games like that. You like Silver a lot, don't you?" "What makes you think that?" "He drives you home all the time. Mommy likes him, but she says he's from another planet." Fletch laughed. Your mommy's probably right. When they reached the bridge, Susanna looked over the side. Fletch could see the water rushing among the rocks, among clumps of weeds, but nothing that even remotely resembled a troll. "Maybe she's hiding back under the bridge where we can't see her," Susanna suggested. "I've got something I want to give her. Would you take it down there for me?" "What have you got?" he asked her. "A scary memory. I want to get rid of it. She won't care if it's bad." Susanna unzipped her book bag and took out a sheet of notebook paper. She had divided it into squares on which she had drawn pictures. The first was a picture of a black pig beside a yellow house, the next of a white pig beside a brown house, and the third showed a black and white pig beside a house of carefully drawn red rectangles. The bearded man bent beneath his bundle of sticks looked like the woodcutter on the cover of Led Zeppelin 4. And then there was the wolf. It looked up at Fletch from one of the squares on the paper, conscious and alive. Fletch felt a shiver creep up his spine. "Susanna, you spent a long time on this. Are you sure you don't want to keep it?" She shook her head. "I don't like it. It's too scary." Some of the pictures she had drawn were more than scary. The wolf was a monster, and it had torn 2 of the pigs to pieces. "Okay, then. You wait up here. I'll be back in a minute." Fletch climbed over the side of the bridge and began to make his way down the steep slope to the stream. Almost immediately he noticed the cold, dank smell which lingered beneath the bridge, and for the first time he wondered if something might actually be down there. Not a troll, surely, but maybe some kind of animal. The rocks at the stream's edge were covered with moss and lichen, brown and slippery where the water rushed over them. Muddy bits of driftwood lay among the roots and tufts of coarse grass. And something else, a sodden piece of burlap maybe, was caught there, trailing in the current. Fletch left Susanna's drawings on a stone ledge, which stretched away into the shadow beneath the arch of the bridge. Something, surely only a muskrat, slid into the water a few yards further back. Fletch did not look too closely. Quickly he climbed the bank and saw Susanna running to her mother, who was coming from the mill. He waved and headed home, his thoughts returning to the stones in the weed garden as he tried to remember what his father had said about them. They were part of the foundation of the old church, built before the Civil War. During the time the signs had been hidden from view, the significance of the sites they might represent could easily have been forgotten. But what were the sites, and where were they? In the weed garden, crepe myrtle blossoms littered the ground, as bright as shattered glass. The honeysuckle and trumpet vine draping the fence had turned brown, but there was a plant he hadn't noticed, with spiraling fern-like leaves and tiny yellow flowers. Fletch took a notebook from his backpack and sketched each of the symbols, the labyrinth, the hand, the tree, and the circles, intending to show them to Silver first thing in the morning. He and his mother would be coming over for the cookout tomorrow evening, and he could look at the actual stones. As he copied the pattern of the labyrinth, he realized he hadn't even visited the clearing since meeting Silver. It had been a bridge between his everyday life and the mysterious regions of his imagination, and now these two worlds had merged in Silver himself. If Susanna noticed how much he liked him, it must be more apparent than he had realized. The big question was Silver aware of it? And if he wasn't, how would Fletch ever find the courage to tell him? After supper, he decided to row across Moon Lake and hike over to the maze. He had never entered the central clearing on his previous trips, and if it really was one of the 4 holy places, it might help him to resist the influences of the tide and the wicked old wolf. Fletch took off his school clothes and put on a comfortable pair of shorts. Lately, the heat of summer had begun losing its grip in the evenings, and in 2 or 3 weeks he would have to give up cut-offs in favor of more civilized clothing. Already his feet were used to shoes again. Some morning soon he'd wake up cold and know that summer had slipped out during the night. When he reached the far edge of the lake, he jumped out of the boat and pulled it up onto the bank. The water was colder than he had expected. He drew on his sneakers, then stood up and listened. The sounds of the forest merged into a single living voice: birds and insects, wind in the pines, the noisy dash of a frightened rabbit. There was a special pleasure in being alone in the woods. The peace of deep shadows stole over him as he walked, and he was also aware of the hum of motion beneath it, the turbulence of innumerable small lives, reminding him that the wild wood was truly wild. By the time he reached the labyrinth, he was filled with expectation, knowing he had done the right thing in coming here. Just ahead was the beginning of the track, sheltered among the hawthorns. Silver stood in the shadows at the first turn of the path. Fletch hardly recognized him, not because he looked different, but because he looked perfectly ordinary. Deep in the back of his mind, there had always been a suspicion that the boy in the clearing was a different creature from the one he actually knew. He had been shocked when he ran into Silver at the water fountain at school the first day, and now he was equally shocked at seeing him here. Silver was as surprised as Fletch. "Where did you spring from?" he asked. "Did my mother tell you how to find me?" "No, I had no idea you were out here at all. Did you want to be alone?" "Not particularly." Fletch didn't know what to say. Everything clamored to come out at once. The confession, so long withheld, that he had spied on him in the clearing. The discovery of the stones. His sudden inexpressible happiness at finding him here. Silver nodded toward the beginning of the path. "Come on. This is an interesting place." Fletch was about to follow him into the maze, but Silver stopped and took him by the shoulders. "You're really here, right?" Confused, Fletch stared at him. "Of course I'm here." Silver nodded. "Just checking. Sometimes I see things when I'm out here. And, well, they aren't altogether real." "That's what I thought when I saw you. It kind of took me by surprise. I want to try something. Silver drew a bright bandana from his pocket. Pop taught me this even before the deal with the snake. Here, let me blindfold you. Fletch stood quietly while Silver secured the bandana over his eyes, then guided him to the entrance of the labyrinth. It's simple, really, he said. All you have to do is follow the path as far as you can, without removing the blindfold. Are you kidding? Fletch reached out through the void toward the area of Silver's voice. Listen, Silver, you may be Native American, but I'll crack my skull on a tree limb before I've gone 10 feet. You're Native American too, you dope, Silver said flatly. You were born here, weren't you? Just start walking. I'll come along and warn you if you're about to bump into anything. Fletch started out carefully, hands stretched out in front of him, feeling like a fool. He tried to remember how the path ran, but soon became disoriented and stopped. Quit thinking so hard, Silver demanded. Just walk where it feels natural. I'll watch out for you. Fletch set out recklessly, determined to do it properly or kill himself in the effort. It was so easy, he could hardly believe what was happening. There was, quite simply, a difference in the thickness of the air. On either side it felt close and confining. Ahead it seemed open. Quickly and easily he threaded his way through the winding darkness. Somewhere along the way he lost track of Silver, but it didn't seem to matter, because there wasn't the least chance he would run into anything. After a while he felt as if he didn't even have to move his feet at all. The air was alive with silent laughter which swept him along, apart from any effort of his own. Finally he was aware of nothing but a sense of suspension, as if he had come to rest at the core of the earth. For the moment, nothing else was required. He had been unreservedly accepted, not because he had done anything, but because acceptance was the very nature of this boundless place. Fletch noticed the faint warmth of the sun, the smell of grass, the friendly hand of the wind. His back prickled, and he realized he was lying on the ground. He reached up and loosened the blindfold. Above the clearing spread a pale evening sky, circled by a spinning ring of leaves. He rolled his head to one side and saw Silver sitting no more than 5 feet away, grinning in delight. "Welcome to the spirit world," he said. The clearing in the center of the labyrinth was circular, the grass chest-high and fragrant. The surrounding trees were mostly black gum and poplar. Whatever magic had guided him here was still present in the air, like open windows on a spring day. He felt as if he might be able to fly. No wonder you were dancing, Fletch thought, and then realized he had spoken aloud. "Yes," said Silver, "I found your tracks that day." "I didn't mean to spy," Fletch told him. Then he hesitated. "Well, yes, actually, I guess I did." Silver tossed back his hair. "Doesn't matter. You wouldn't have found this place if it hadn't called you." Fletch met his gaze. "I'm pretty glad it did." Silver kicked out at him, scuffing the dirt with his sneaker. "This place can be peculiar. People still come here every few years, from Oak Hollow and some of the other communities. Sometimes you can look across the forked ways and speak to the people who live there." "The forked ways? I thought they were just in my dreams." Fletch sat up and began picking the grass out of his hair. "Susanna Nelms told me today that you were from another planet. I'm beginning to think she may be right. So this is one of the 4 places Bill Weathers' letter talks about. Is that right?" "Bound to be. Actually, it's the one they felt most sure about." "So what would you think," Fletch asked him carefully, "if I told you I'd found 4 old stones, each with a different symbol carved on it, and one of the symbols was a picture of this very maze?" Silver's face remained blank for a moment, as if he hadn't heard. Then his eyes narrowed, almost in disbelief. "I would wonder how on earth you found such a thing, when my grandfather and Bill and Betsy spent 40 years combing every hill and hollow in these woods and never came across them." "They're not in the woods," Fletch replied. "They're part of the foundation of the old church. and all the stones but one had been left with the carved side facing the earth. He described each of the signs to Silver, and promised to show them to him when he and his mother came over for the cookout. Aside from the maze, Silver couldn't be sure from his descriptions what the carvings on the stones might represent, though he had some ideas. When they went to the weed garden the next evening, he looked closely at each of the designs. Finally, he pointed to the symbol of the tree. "That might be the Sabbath oak down at the old campground," he told Fletch. "I reckon the circles could represent Assembly Church, like you said. But what about this picture of a hand?" Fletch shrugged. "Maybe Betsy remembers something about them. How about we go by her place and talk to her tomorrow after school?" They heard laughter as they walked back toward the house, and Fletch saw that his father and Elizabeth Kendall were already grilling steaks near the long picnic table in the yard. The friendly smells of charcoal, lighter fluid, and broiling meat brought on a twinge of homesickness. He and his father had scarcely cooked out since last summer, before his mother had died. The steaks were only a formality. His father's real craft lay in the creation of tremendous Greek salads, which were not so much meant to be eaten as harvested. During the meal, Silver mentioned their plan to visit Betsy Weathers the following afternoon. "Betsy probably knows more about Assembly's history than anyone alive," Mark said, "but she's not one to talk your ear off." "Dad," Fletch asked, "do you know anything about some kind of creature called the Wog?" "Just the common tales. It was some kind of big animal like a wolf or a panther. Used to terrorize the early settlers. You can read about it in Wilson's History of the County. It would walk around the cabins at night and slide its long forked tongue through the cracks between the logs. It keeps coming back every now and then, like Assembly's version of Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster." Mark cut a bite of steak and chewed it slowly. "The last time I remember anyone getting stirred up about the Wog was about 10 or 12 years ago. Some hippies had set up a kind of commune over near the Bottoms, and the Wog paid them a visit one night. I suspect some boys from Brazelton must have been playing a trick to run them off, but nobody ever admitted to it." "I saw it once," said Silver's mother quietly. "I was just a little girl, but my father saw it, too. We were visiting down here, driving late at night on Gum Springs Road, and saw something standing in the middle of the road. I thought it was a cow, till it turned around." Mark stared at her. "What did it look like?" "To me, it looked like a wolf, only black and shaggy and much bigger. Pop was so shocked he just stopped the truck dead in the road. It came walking slowly up to us, and then it just wasn't there." Fletch had a mental image of the wicked old wolf strolling along the road in top hat and tails. "You mean it vanished?" "It seemed to. One minute it was heading toward us. The next it was gone, as if it had never been there at all. Except for the tracks, there were huge paw prints left in the dust of the road." Fletch noticed that his father and Elizabeth Kendall took to each other very well. He didn't know whether her beauty or her intelligence held the greater attraction for him, but both were considerable. He wondered if they might fall in love and eventually get married, though it was hard to imagine her in the traditional role of a minister's wife. Like her son, she was somehow uncanny. After the steaks were gone and the salad had been reduced to shreds and patches, he and Silver gathered up the utensils and carried them inside. Silver turned on the tap and put the dishes in to soak. "After you told me about meeting yourself, I started thinking. Did you ever go back up to the attic to look around, to see if it was the way you remembered from your dream?" "No," said Fletch. "Maybe I should. I just remember it being pitch dark and really hot up there." "Come on, show me. I want to see this place." At the top of the house, Fletch opened the attic door and turned on the electric light. The room held an assortment of trunks and boxes. There were artificial wreaths in plastic bags, stacks of jigsaw puzzles, and old magazines. Silver bent and brushed his hand across the floor. "Dusty," he said, "but I can't see any footprints." Fletch pointed. "I was way over there. I remember that stack of old newspapers." He went over and picked up the yellowed issue from the top of the stack. It felt both soft and brittle, like old skin. That was the way it had felt in the dream. He hadn't been able to see the papers before. It had been too dark. Fletch thought of something and returned to the attic door. "What is it?" Silver asked. Fletch picked up a plastic lighter and handed it to him. "It was dark. I used this to find my way to the door. I must have dropped it." "Holy smoke," Silver whispered. "You know what this means." "I was really up here. It wasn't a dream at all." The hour between twilight and full dark often had a strange effect on Silver. When they returned to the porch, he leapt over the railing without any explanation and raced up the drive toward the highway. Fletch had no idea what he was up to, but his spirit was infectious, and the dark seemed filled with promise. By the time he caught up with him, Fletch was out of breath. They walked side by side up the center line of the highway. The road was deserted, and the air had grown chilly. Tree frogs were singing in the kudzu off to either side. An antique car passed, something from the 40s or early 50s, and the driver waved. "When I was little, my grandmother had a car like that," Fletch told Silver. "It was blue, with a long nose, looked kind of like a big blue rat. Even now, when I think about it, I imagine it with whiskers and a tail." "You're crazy," said Silver. "You know that." "Where are we going?" Fletch asked him. "Any place special?" "I don't know. I sometimes wonder." "You sometimes wander." All at once, Silver stopped and peered ahead. Beyond the curve of the road, a car's bright beams came into view, swinging toward them like searchlights. Silver remained standing in the middle of the road. Growing a little worried, Fletch jerked on his arm, but he refused to move. Just when Fletch was convinced that he had gone into a trance, he shouted, "Run!" They leapt into the air and bounded along the edge of the highway. At the moment the car roared past, Silver turned aside and dove into the thick kudzu, pulling Fletch with him. They plummeted down the slope and tumbled into the dark, yielding web of vines. For a moment there was no sound but their ragged breathing. "They saw us, I think," Silver said finally. His face was flushed and leaves were caught in his hair. "Of course they saw us," Fletch gasped. "Who was it?" Silver turned toward him. "I don't know. Does it matter?" He climbed back up the bank, but kept out of sight of the road. "You did that just for fun, didn't you?" Fletch asked in astonishment. "We probably scared the folks in that car to death." Silver nodded, unrepentant. Fletch crawled up to where he was crouching and looked past him through the tangle of vines to the road, moving as close to him as he dared. Then he leaned carefully forward and with feather lightness brushed his lips against his hair. Silver didn't notice, and Fletch drew back, his heart hammering in his chest. "This is like a dream," he thought. "Why are we even out here? I haven't felt this strange since the weeks after Mom died." Another car went past, but still Silver made no move. "We are animals," he said softly. "We live in the forest. This is our front door. Sooner or later we must all cross the road." "Cars or no cars?" Fletch asked. "That's right." "But why? What's over there?" "No one knows," said Silver. "Someday we'll find out, if we don't get squashed by a big blue rat." "Silver?" He turned. Fletch bent toward him, lifted aside a lock of his hair, and gave him a gentle, hesitant kiss. His lips felt like velvet. Silver stiffened, though he did not draw back. He looked completely stunned. "Wow," he said unsteadily. "I sure didn't expect that." "Me either. You're not mad with me, I hope." "No, just a little startled." He gave a shrug. "Well, we ought to head back, I guess." Fletch followed him up to the highway, grateful for the darkness. They avoided looking at each other and tried to talk casually. Finally, Silver met his gaze and must have read his dismay. He stopped and touched his elbow. "Fletch, it's okay." Fletch nodded, not trusting himself to say anything further. All the rest of the evening the kiss was like a ghost hovering between them, unacknowledged, but visible to them both. Something's in the wind. 4x Banks closed the door to the barber shop and stood for a moment on the sidewalk. Next door he could hear his daughter Ellie getting ready to leave the beauty shop for the day. They had been at this schedule for so long that neither of them needed to ask the other to wait. Whoever came out first simply stood on the sidewalk until the other showed up. 4x enjoyed cutting hair, but more than that, he enjoyed the conversation. All the men in town stopped by sooner or later, and all the women visited Ellie. He had no doubt that between the two of them, they knew more about the daily life of Assembly than anyone else around. That morning, Captain Harbour had found a prize bull slaughtered and left in the field. He suspected it might have been the work of a panther. There had been rumors of one along Indian Creek, somewhere between Jackson Trail and the Mulberry River. 4x knew what the loss meant to Cap. Outlanders assumed that the Harbour's cattle were Guernsey hybrids, but they weren't. Cap and his wife had successfully maintained the only herd of pure-breed Alderneys in America, and through their efforts, the breed had been narrowly saved from extinction in Europe. 4x thought back to the little Nelms girl and her imperious manner. Callie Nelms had told Ellie that Susanna had awakened the last 3 nights, screaming about trolls and pigs. Even Doc was starting to worry about her. Ellie opened the door of the beauty shop. "Waiting out here long, old man?" she chided him. "Who's cooking tonight, you or me?" 4x shook his head. "Nary one of us. You and me are going to Runyon's. I don't feel up to cooking or washing either one." Ellie slipped an arm around him. "That's fine by me. You ought to quit standing all day." Her father smiled ruefully. "Now that's just foolish. How am I going to cut hair sitting down?" "You aren't. I am. The menfolk can come to me." 4x laughed. "Cap'n come in for a shave and a haircut, and you'd send him out with a beehive all rouged up." "Daddy, I'm serious." He looked at her, actually considering what she was saying for the first time. "Well, I'll tell you what. We'll talk to Landry about taking down the wall. How's that?" She stared at him. "You mean connect the shops?" "That's right. I'll teach you about sideburns, and you can teach me about all those little curlers and things. The men and women can look across at each other and laugh." As they crossed the street, Ellie took her father's arm. "Something's in the wind. I saw Cap heading out earlier today. He tell you what happened?" 4x nodded. "Could have been a panther. At least that's the word he's putting out." "That what you think?" "No, ma'am. I think it was a snake. Big old ugly cottonmouth. And I'm pretty sure Captain thinks so too." Something to eat. Cotton Wills cut the bull's heart into thin slivers. Half he sprinkled with hot sauce and ate. The other half he arranged on the altar. He opened a heavy glass jug, and the smell of alcohol and peaches filled the ancient stone temple. Carefully he drenched the raw flesh in moonshine. At the flick of his cigarette lighter, the alcohol turned into blue flame, but the strips of the bull's heart did not burn. Expectantly, he watched the image he had built, a huge frame of sticks and vines, covered in mud and grass, the jaws made from an animal trap, filed to a knife-edge sharpness. It remained completely motionless, betraying no sign of the presence he had hoped to summon. Cotton had learned from his father that the wog had no permanent physical form, that it needed some kind of vehicle through which to accomplish its work in the world. But he sensed no gratitude, not even the barest acknowledgment of his effort. "What do you want?" He went to the door of the temple and looked out over the sluggish blue-black mud. unchanged. Everywhere else time passed, but here nothing changed. No grinning liberal Jimmy Carter, no Iran hostage crisis, no Watergate, no Vietnam. Just trees and mud and stink and the old spirit waiting for something to eat. What do you want? And then almost a reply, almost a voice in his head. Something to eat. Give me something to eat. Cotton took a sip of moonshine. An old song was in his head. Wait till the sun shines, Nellie, as the clouds go drifting by. He looked up at the skull of his grandfather in its niche above the altar. His father and grandfather had known what it was all about. They would have known what to do, what sacrifice the oppositioner required. Help me, Cotton prayed. Give a hint, there's a price to be paid. Cotton placed his hand in the sharpened steel trap that formed the jaws of the image he had created. Then he sprung the trap. Pain tore through him like lightning. The 4 fingers of his left hand lay hidden within the wog's clasped jaws, almost completely severed. Cotton screamed and jerked his hand away from the trap, ripping free of his fingers and leaving them behind. Blood gouted from the stumps, spraying the altar and the thing which lay upon it. Groaning, Cotton shrugged out of his shirt and wrapped it around the spurting wounds. Crouching on the floor, he tried to keep from blacking out, tried to keep from vomiting from the pain. He sealed the bloody cloth with black mud, then lay down, shuddering on the cool stone floor. All around him, the world grew unbearably real. Here, finally, was the acknowledgment he craved. At last he had gained the attention of the dark god. Cotton felt no regret for the loss of his fingers. He did not resent the pain of his wounds. Instead, he felt like singing. After a while, he was able to stand. The thing on the altar remained motionless, but there was something different about it. It was beyond him now, a thing to be used or discarded as its new owner saw fit. This part of his work was done. He looked down at the steel trap jaws, and with reverence prized them open. There his severed fingers lay, arranged in a spiked and curving pattern of blood. Cotton retrieved one of the fingers almost fearfully. He felt very hungry, almost as if he were starving. Before he even realized what he was doing, he began gnawing the flesh from the bone.